Hello, everyone. Welcome to the FTX podcast. I am really happy to have here with me today Commissioner Peirce. Thank you so much for making time.
Well, Tristan, it's great to be here. I'm going to start with my standard disclaimer, which is that my views are my own views and not necessarily those of the SEC or my fellow commissioners.
Absolutely. And to get started, I actually want to go back in time. I want to hear a little bit about your story and your background and how you entered these regulatory bodies and essentially where that path began.
Well, I'm a lawyer by training, but I'm a would-be economist. And so I majored in economics as an undergrad, really loved it, didn't love the math. So ended up thinking law school was a wiser choice for me. But I do like the idea of kind of marrying those two disciplines. And I think being a securities lawyer enables me to think about economics, but also think about the law. And so that's how I ended up in this area. And I was at a firm that did a lot of SEC work, and a lot of my colleagues had worked at the SEC. So I ended up deciding I needed to spend a little time at the SEC as a regulator, and that turned into 8 years. And then I went and worked on Capitol Hill for a little while, and then went to a think tank to work on regulatory policy issues around the financial markets. And then got an opportunity to come back as a commissioner to the SEC. That was in January 2018. Well, it was a long process, but I ended up back here in January 2018 and really welcomed the chance to come back in this role because it gave me a chance to think about how we can make our capital markets better. The capital markets in the United States are a really valuable asset that we have, and I wanted to make sure that they remain that way. And one of the things I was thinking about specifically is, having been here before, I knew that the agency is not always good when it comes to innovation and new technology and new products and new services in the financial industry. And so what could I do to sort of push back against the regulatory tide that just tends to push against innovation? And so that was certainly something I was thinking about when I came here. I didn't know that crypto would be as important of a topic while I was here as it has been, but I certainly was thinking about innovation.
And on more of a personal level, at what point were you introduced to cryptocurrencies and blockchain, or what point did they become something of interest to you?
Well, I mean, I heard about Bitcoin probably, I probably around 9 years ago or so. And I thought it was intriguing. I'm always interested in people experimenting with new things, thinking about different ways to transfer value and store value. And so that was interesting to me. Some of my colleagues worked quite a bit when I was working at the research center. Some of my colleagues worked quite a bit on Bitcoin related issues, crypto more broadly, but really they were focused, especially at that time, on Bitcoin. And so that was where I got my introduction and thought it was interesting, but didn't buy any, which, as many people regret. So I've not ever owned any, but that was my first introduction.
It's good to know. I mean, you've produced a prolific amount of writing on many different topics around crypto policy, like guidance, concurrence, dissents, speeches, stuff of that nature. With all of the work and time that you've put into this, are there any sort of core principles or core guidelines that you've now formed as far as your thesis when approaching this asset class?
Well, I don't know that I have core philosophies that differ from my philosophies more generally, or my approaches more generally, which is that when I think about regulation, I think about the role that we play an important role as regulators, but we have to be mindful that that's a limited role, and that the default should not be regulation, that the default should be that people are able to engage in the transactions they want to engage in without being told they can't do it, unless that transaction is somehow potentially harmful to others or to the financial system. And so, there are good reasons for regulation to come into play, but we also have to be mindful that every time you put a rule in place, you limit people's freedom to make choices that they otherwise would make. So justify it, make sure that the costs are not don't overwhelm the benefits of putting in a new rule. So that's kind of how I think about this area as well. I'm not troubled by the fact that people are experimenting with new things. And I think experimentation has been so central to not only our financial markets, but our economy more generally. And often that experimentation doesn't lead to success, it leads to failure. But then coming out of that failure, either that person who's failed or someone else will draw lessons from the failure and build something new and try something new. And that's how you make progress. So I'm always mindful of that when I'm thinking about our regulatory system. We need to build a regulatory system that acknowledges that failure is going to happen, protects people, but also doesn't stop people from trying new things.
And a lot of people always hear about the SEC, but they're not so certain, and including myself, on the structures internally and how the operational aspects of this all goes. I would love if you would mind giving an overview of sort of how the structure of the SEC works in the sense of passing new regulations for financial assets.
Yeah, I think that's an important question because government can be a real black box, even to someone who goes through law school, as I had done when I was working on SEC issues from the outside at a law firm. The agency was a black box. And so it really takes getting inside the agency to understand how it operates. Each agency operates a little differently. The SEC is an independent regulatory commission, which means that we are made up of 5 members. Typically, we're down 1 right now, but typically there are 5 of us. It's politically balanced, meaning that no more than 3 members can be of the president's party. And we, as a commission, make decisions on enforcement actions. We vote together on enforcement actions, and we vote on rulemakings, new rulemakings. We have a large staff, not as large as many agencies, but we're about 4,500 people and spread across the US. And those staff are in regulatory divisions. Those are corporation finance, which deals with things like companies when they're trying to sell securities. They do, and when they're making disclosures, that division deals with offerings and with disclosures. And then we have a division of trading and markets, which deals with things like exchanges and alternative trading systems, broker dealers, regulation of broker dealers. And then you have the division of investment management, which is where I worked when I was a staff attorney here. And that is the division that deals with investment advisors and mutual funds, exchange traded funds. And then you have a division of examinations, which goes out and looks at broker dealers and at investment advisors and at other regulated entities, and examines them to make sure that they're complying with our rules. And then finally, you have a division of enforcement. There are also many supportive offices around this, but these are the big divisions. The division of enforcement is the one that makes recommendations to the commission about bringing enforcement actions against companies or individuals for violating the securities laws. So that's kind of an overview of how things work. A lot of what we do on a day-to-day basis is really done by the staff. So when the SEC reviews filings, for example, that work is all done by the staff, or as I said, examining entities. And the commission is really in the decision-making role. Although even there, sometimes we delegate decision-making down to the staff, because otherwise we would not be able to get all our work done.
Yeah. I guess 2 questions based off of that. If somebody were interested in working for the SEC, are there any of these departments that you would particularly recommend, or is it just dependent on people's nature?
It's dependent on people's nature and on their interests. I would recommend all of them. I think it's really wonderful for us to get talent from lots of different places, and even people who don't want to come here for a whole career, but think, I'd like to spend a couple years understanding how the SEC works. It's a good place to come, and you'll have great colleagues. I think it's a really excellent place to learn. And I'm biased, but I think it's the most interesting regulatory agency in the government to work for. So highly recommend it.
Awesome. And my second question is, it seems like a lot of what the commissioners have to think about or do is synthesis, because it seems that a ton of information comes to you. You have to organize it, structure it, know where the decision-making processes are. Has this been something that you felt was natural with you for a long time, or has through these roles you've learned to be able to absorb large amounts of information and then have output of decisions?
I mean, it's certainly a challenge. The amount of pages that I have to read, the amount of different issues that I'm trying to focus on at the same time is difficult. I like the way you put it. It's synthesis. It's sort of trying to step back and look at the bigger picture, understand how the different things that we're doing interact with one another. I think that's a really important part of the role. But I will say that I get a lot of help, not only from my own personal staff at the commission, but also from people outside of the commission who are thinking and looking at what we're doing and critiquing it. And that helps me to think sort of more broadly about what we're doing and what the effects might be.
That makes a lot of sense. And another thing I've always been curious about is, as you were saying, there are different political parties and the commissioners are divided to some degree between these political parties. How does policy or your thoughts around policy get involved with the actions that you guys have to take on day to day? And like, what is Congress's involvement with the SEC?
Well, Congress does oversee us and they are the source of our funding. So we are certainly cognizant of what Congress is thinking of what we're doing. And that's important because for political accountability, Congress is politically accountable. And so we are through them politically accountable as well. So that is an important piece of it. But look, capital markets are a treasure that all of us share. It doesn't matter what party you're in. These are markets that serve everyone in the United States. And it's the goal of all of us on the commission to not only make sure those markets work well, but to make sure that more people participate in them, whether it's as investors, saving money, investing it, passing it on to the next generation, or as entrepreneurs drawing from the capital markets to build a business, which then helps to build the communities that they're in. These are things we're all committed to. And so I'm not thinking about my job in political terms, rather in the sense of what's good policy. But I do think about policy, what is good policy, as I'm making these very individualized decisions. It's really important to put it in context and think, you of course have to think about the facts and circumstances when you're bringing an enforcement action, or you have to think about the specifics of how a particular rule is going to operate when you're working on a rulemaking. But you also want to think, what is it that we're doing? What is the effect of this going to be? What is the precedential value of this going to be? What message are we sending with this rule or this enforcement action? And so those things are always running around in my head when I'm thinking about how to vote on a particular rule or a particular enforcement action.
Mm-hmm. This next question I actually wrote down because I think it really shows how many different things you guys have to think about at all moments in time. But it's just like, let's look just at crypto. So the SEC has a ton of work streams at the moment. There's the Bitcoin ETF, there's a staff accounting bulletin on the capital requirements for the customer crypto balances. There's the ATS proposal and the potential for it to, as some have said, create an entry to requiring the registration of certain crypto trading venues. There's the ongoing questions of when a digital asset is a security, an investment contract, commodity, or something else, and many other, including enforcement and whatnot. Like, where does crypto sit as a priority in the SEC's broader mission? Because there's so many subjects you guys are looking at, you commissioners are looking at from the perspective of crypto, but that's just a small piece of everything else you're doing. So how does crypto fit into the whole pie?
It's important to bring that up because crypto is a small piece of what we do, although some people spend a lot of their time on it. We have an Office of Financial Innovation, our FinHub, which is not only dedicated to crypto, but also to other financial technologies. They have a lot of people, well, it's very small, but they spend a lot of their time thinking about crypto. And similarly, we have an enforcement team, which got some news recently in terms of expanding. That enforcement team thinks a lot about cyber issues and crypto issues. Crypto are at the forefront. And then through each of the divisions that I mentioned earlier in our conversation, you have people who think a lot about crypto. They're people within those divisions. Again, a small number of people, but devoted to thinking about crypto issues. At the commission level, we've got lots of different things going on. This is a very busy time in our history in terms of rulemaking. There's just a tremendous amount of rulemaking activity, most of which has nothing to do with crypto. And so we are definitely not spending all of our time thinking about crypto as some people might think or hope that we are.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know within the crypto industry, we certainly think that because we see some of you being vocal, some of the commissioners being vocal around these things. So it makes us excited because it means that, you know, there's more thought process coming into an industry we all care very deeply about. And I know you've spoken very positively at different times about cryptocurrencies and blockchain and the innovations of these technologies. I'd be curious, what is it for you that makes it resonate and makes you as a commissioner of the SEC think that this might be a technology that could bring innovation and, you know, further capital markets for the United States?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, one, I'm not an advocate of any industry, but I think it is interesting how much experimentation and exploration there's going on in crypto. To think about, are there better ways that we can do things that we've been doing a particular way for a long time? Are there ways that we can disintermediate some of these transactions? Are there ways that we can make sure that everyone participates on the same terms? Are there ways that we can enhance transparency by having everything be open source? And then are there ways that we can connect people together so that they can build something together without having to be in the same place, without having to even know each other personally? Is there a way that we can do that? And I think those things are very exciting. There are a lot of areas within the financial system and within our capital markets that could be improved by new technology. That, you know, if we will all securities, all equity securities, all stocks one day be crypto? That may be. Well, are there ways that we can make our settlement cycle more efficient? Are there ways that we can eliminate some of the risks that we've seen play out in you know, the last couple decades around large central parties, right? If you can use crypto and decentralization to spread out risk, then that can actually be a good thing for the resilience of the financial system. So there are a lot of different places where I think it can come into play. Even the possibility of transferring value in a very efficient way across the internet, that's a really important development, and one that I think that we should celebrate and encourage. Again, you know, the details matter, and you know, I can talk about it, but the people who are actually building it have a lot of real problems that they have to negotiate as they're building it. But I think it's the possibilities to address some of these things that have really dogged us for a long time. That's what gets me excited about this.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you have any thoughts for some of these builders that are building perhaps within the United States in these systems of ways that they can do so and align themselves for success with the regulatory bodies?
Well, one thing to do is to come and talk to us, and I somewhat hesitate in saying that because I've been quite critical of my own agency, and it's not the staff of the agency. It really, as I outlined, we the commissioners are the ones making the decisions and setting the direction of the agency, but we haven't really used this come in and talk to us mantra to produce something, to produce a productive dialogue where we're together developing a regulatory framework that makes sense. And by together, I mean us as regulators working with, obviously, Congress, who tells us what authority we have, but also the industry, and then people using these products and services. Everyone needs to be part of this conversation. And so I would like us to do that in a much more public way. And if we were to do that, then I think people who are building things need to come in and explain to us in terms we can understand what it is they're building. you can, don't overdo it. Don't overpromise what you're building. Be realistic about what the challenges are and what from our perspective as regulators, what the challenges might be around this technology. Be upfront about that. And I think then together we can work through and build a regulatory solution that takes advantage of the aspects of the technology that make it easier to regulate, and then addresses the aspects of the technology that make it harder to regulate. So I think everyone needs to approach the conversation in good faith. Again, I'm trying to push my agency to do that. So far, I think we've really fallen short.
And I know you've proposed several safe harbors or safe harbor ideas for digital assets, such as that if these were respected, there wouldn't be violation of securities laws. Has there been any uptake in these with the rest of the commissioners or the agency as a whole, or what's the process with these at the moment?
There's not been any uptake.
Okay.
So the idea behind my safe harbor was that when my colleagues raised concerns around token sales, I think they raised valid concerns. They're concerned that people are buying tokens, not understanding who's behind the project, what the plans of the project are, what the token economics are, how progress is going on developing a network. And so I said, yeah, I agree. Let's try to figure out a way to get people this information in a way that it's backed up by the anti-fraud rules under the securities laws, but without forcing that token to perpetually be a security. Let's let people get out of this system when it makes sense, when the network is developed, when there aren't the information asymmetries. We talk about information asymmetries, meaning the people building the project know a lot more than the people who are buying the tokens. But at some point, if you really do decentralize, then everyone has access to the same information. So at that point, the securities laws really don't have a role to play anymore. And so that was kind of the idea of the safe harbor, is to let people transition out. I've not gotten uptake here at the commission. There has been some interest in it or in something similar on the Hill in Congress. And so that maybe something will at some point move forward with it. But I think here at the SEC, we've been reluctant to acknowledge that there are real ramifications from putting the security label on tokens. And there are ramifications that may make it hard for networks to actually be useful and to expand and to grow and to benefit from the network effects that we want them to. So I'm really advocating for a pretty big shift in the way we think about some of this industry, and I don't think that I've been successful so far.
Are there any things that the cryptocurrency industry can do to be helpful with these initiatives?
Well, I think it's certainly helpful if people come in and talk to my colleagues on the commission about what it is what challenges they're facing, what a reasonable regulatory regime would look like, whether that's my safe harbor or something like it. And I've appreciated, I put the safe harbor up on GitHub, the second version 2.0 is up on GitHub. And so people have actually made some suggestions about how to change it and iterated on it, which I think is wonderful. And so, thinking along those lines of, yes, we understand that there are legitimate regulatory objectives to be met. If we're going to meet those, what's a reasonable way to meet those? I think as many ideas as we can get around how to do that will be helpful. And then when someone wants to do something, whether it's a chair of the SEC or whether it's someone in Congress, there'll be a plethora of ideas from which they can choose to build a regulatory framework that makes sense.
That makes a lot of sense. Hear that, listeners. Go share ideas and help with this. The United States is quite unique that there's two federal regulatory bodies for markets. There's the SEC and there's the CFTC, while the only clear crypto spot regulatory system at the moment are these money transmitter licenses across the 50 states. What are your thoughts on having a sort of federal cryptocurrency agency, and what the perspective of the SEC and the CFTC are to something like this happening?
Well, I think there are different approaches one could take to regulation. And I think we as a society need to sit down and figure that out. I mean, if we decide that we want a federal regulatory body, and there's a lot of interest in that because it's very difficult to deal with many different state regulators. And so having a federal regulator could make sense. And then some of this stuff does sort of touch on what we or the CFTC or the banking regulators are already doing in other areas. And so it may not make sense to say, well, all crypto is going to be regulated at this particular federal agency, because if the dreams that people have around crypto materialize, then crypto is going to be infused in lots of different things. It's going to be infused in our traditional financial markets. And so we really can't just say, well, we're going to pull it apart and set it up in its own regulator. That said, so far, the SEC, as I mentioned, hasn't really set a productive path. And so I can see that Congress might be getting a little frustrated with the SEC's approach. And as you mentioned, because we're unique in having these two regulators, two sister regulators of the capital markets, it can be a little awkward. I mean, totally apart from crypto, over the years, there have been times where we've disagreed with one another about who has jurisdiction over a particular product. But what I like to see is for the two regulators to work together. We both serve the American people. And so we should both be wanting what is best for the markets. And I think that often means that we lock arms and we sit down together with the CFTC. We, again, echoing my prior comments about needing to talk to lots of people in the industry and who are using products and services and who otherwise are interested, bringing all these people together in public so that we can have these conversations, and then thinking about what the best regulatory approach might be. And perhaps that approach is going to be one that's going to involve both the CFTC and the SEC. Wouldn't that be a nice opportunity for us to coordinate with our sister regulator and to jointly regulate something? This might be a good opportunity for us to try that. So again, ultimately, Congress is the one that's going to be able to decide who has the authority. But in the interim, I think we can be working very productively together with the CFTC.
Yeah, I think one thing that you said that was super impactful to me was the fact if there's one regulatory agency that oversees crypto in one way, it'll limit crypto's expansion into many other industries in which it could have positive impact. That's a really good point, and I'll definitely take that away with me. And the next question I have for you, Commissioner, is around NFTs. NFTs have allowed a blooming artist ecosystem. They've allowed the onboarding of many new people into the cryptocurrency and the blockchain ecosystem. It's actually potentially a very revolutionary innovation if it continues to grow and expand in the way it has been. How do you think people should think of it from a regulatory perspective? Is it a financial asset? Is it something else? How are you personally perhaps thinking of it?
Well, I think like so many things in the crypto space, NFTs can't be just lumped together as one thing. There's a lot of diversity within NFTs. And so I always caution people, you need to look at the facts and circumstances. You do need to think about the securities laws because the securities laws touch lots of things. And so, an NFT can be just equivalent to art, but it can also be something that comes with governance rights or rights to a revenue stream, or people can be using it to serve as collateral for something. So there are a lot of different, you can fractionalize NFTs. There are a lot of different things that can be done with NFTs. And so, people just need to be thinking about that and be careful. And that's why I'm going to take my lawyerly approach and just say, I'm not going to give you a blanket answer to that.
No, absolutely. That makes sense because they're all so different too, as you said. And I guess tying into that a little bit, crypto moves so fast and there's always these new different types of cryptocurrencies and blockchain assets. As a regulatory agency, as you were saying earlier, that has so many different things that you're looking at, how do you guys look at all these new advances? Is it that when one of these new approaches hits critical mass, then it receives more resources investigating it? Or do you have teams that are always trying to stay at the forefront of what's happening?
I mean, I think that's a really important question to ask. And I think it's one of the difficulties for a regulator in this space. Just as you think you understand one thing, something new comes up and you're trying to understand it. And a lot of this is really technically quite difficult to understand. And because there's a lot of hype in the space too, so people are talking about all kinds of things, and you got to sort of peel back the hype and try to understand, is there something actually here, or are people just, kind of talking very enthusiastically without there being anything there? So there's always a challenge for us. But I think one of the things that has made me discouraged in this area is that we can see things developing, right? We had DeFi summer, we had the growth in NFTs, we have the growth in stable coins, and those are different trends, and we can see them emerging. And so why not, as we see those things emerging, again, I mean, I don't want to harp on the public interaction, but why not have a roundtable around those issues so that we can get a bunch of people in the room, virtual probably now, but in the room together talking about these latest developments and helping us to sort of formulate some maybe guidelines, or even if it's not going to be an official rulemaking, we can at least put out some thoughts around, these are areas where you as a developer might want to be careful because you could trip up against the securities laws. If we could do something like that. Instead, what we tend to do is just periodically issue these investor alerts to say, investors, watch out for crypto, it's volatile and you could lose a lot of money. And those are important messages to send too, but they can't be the only messages that come out of the commission, because then what ultimately happens is that you see, several years down the road, because enforcement actions take a long time, you see enforcement actions coming out and people are thinking, well, wait a minute, couldn't you have just told us maybe while you saw all that activity going on, what we should have watched out, been aware of, and maybe helped us think through some of these legal issues. People have to hire their own lawyers. We're not anyone's lawyer, but at the same time, we could be doing more to provide guidance. And that's why I've been disappointed to see that we haven't taken that proactive approach.
Mm-hmm. So Sam's been thinking a lot about the regulatory side of things. He's been investing a lot of his time into it and has focused FTX in that direction. Some of the things he's talked about to the company around like what the four priorities are is like investor protection, transparency, market integrity, the systemic risk of the market, and financial crime. I'm curious on your thoughts on which of these at the moment are being embraced in the correct manner and which of these could use more work from the regulatory perspective.
Well, I think about it through the lens of our mission, which is investor protection, facilitating capital formation, and then protecting the integrity of the markets. And I think those things overlap with the four that you just listed. I think in every area, we need more consideration from regulators. I mean, there's been a lot of emphasis on the sort of anti-money laundering, know your customer issues. And I think that is in part because FinCEN was pretty early on to identifying crypto as an area that was worthy of its spending time thinking about, and then putting out early guidance. But I think all of the rest of us regulators are playing a little bit of a game of catch up and trying to think about those other things. And on something like financial stability, it's still very early, and the industry, different aspects are still relatively small, even though stable coins have really expanded in use. They're still relatively small, right? So you can look down the road, and regulators should be doing that and think, is this at some point going to pose a financial stability risk? Those questions are worth asking, but I think it's still early days around a lot of those things. Investor protection issues or customer protection issues are ones that have been, have gotten a lot of attention. We've brought a lot of cases around fraud in this area. We could do more on that. There's no end of fraud that we could be pursuing, and I think that's important for us to be doing. But again, I think where we're really falling down is not putting in a framework for people who are trying to do the right things to kind of guide them and help them figure out how to do the right thing. And that's where I would say it's capital formation and innovation that's really suffering the most.
Understood. Thank you for sharing. And my final question for you is more on the personal side, but I'd like to ask if there's a life lesson or a habit that you've taken on that has significantly improved your life that you would share with the listeners.
Well, I think as you alluded to, there's always a lot going on at the SEC, and I could be working on SEC issues 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It is important sometimes to take a step back, to stop thinking about listening to, reading, anything related to what you're working on primarily, and just, let yourself kind of recover and come back with a fresh mind to things. And I think that not only helps you do a better job in your job, but it also means that you can remember that there are other things outside of your job that are very important for you to be thinking about. And maybe that means that ultimately you decide you want to be spending your work days on something else. But so it's necessary both for you to do a better job, and then for you to put yourself and your job in perspective and realize there are bigger things out in the world. There are bigger problems out in the world as well.
Thank you for sharing that. And thank you so much for coming on the podcast, Commissioner.
It's been a delight. Thank you for having me.
Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
Take care. Bye.